So, it's been 2 years since Voltron ended. I think we should talk. Just an FYI though, this is a biased video reflection regarding my time in the Voltron fandom as well as kind of my opinion on how Voltron is as a whole. So yeah, it's not like a traditional video essay. This really is more opinion based, but I did want to cover all aspects of the show, production, the fandom, the aftermath, and the impact of Voltron Legendary Defender. Voltron Legendary Defender ran from 2016 to 2018 on Netflix. The show revolved around 6 main characters, with the first 5 being Shiro, Keith, Lance, Hunk, and Pidge, who drove mechanical lions that combined into a transformer. They are led by Princess Allura, one of the last few species of her race. As deep in the galaxy for the past 10,000 years, giant space purple cats called the Galra have been enslaving all planets. And now that they have tried to come to Earth, it's up to the new defenders in order to defend Earth and the universe. And that's the very bare minimum summary of this show. Just a bunch of people coming together, fighting against evil. Should be simple, right? And I'll be honest, this is probably gonna shock some people because of how people perceive Voltron. I think the show overall was fine. It wasn't revolutionary, say like Avatar: The Last Airbender, but it was pretty fine up until season 8. Seasons 1 through 7 I think are solid. There were many plot holes and a lot of unanswered questions and plot lines, but it wasn't enough that I thought the show was unbearable to watch. Again, up until season 8, it was enough that kept me interested. I thought all plot holes were supposed to be solved by season 8. They weren't. However, there is something I will have to bring up for this part because it's going to make sense later down the line. The show I think was going for a kind of found family trope of, 6 strangers coming together in order to triumph evil. But the show itself never even fell through with that kind of theme. Since the beginning, when the Paladins end up in space, a lot of them actually wanted to leave Voltron. Pidge's whole story arc is how she wants to find her missing brother and father, to the point that even Allura was allowing her to leave. Lance became super homesick and actually just wanted to go back to Earth. Shiro had nobody, so rip. And Allura spent a lot of time grieving for her people as well. Hunk's family isn't actually mentioned until season 7, so also rip for Hunk. And Keith's orphan storyline comes to a close when he finds out that his mom's alive, and now his storyline is going between his mom and the Paladins. So even though they spent all this time building up teamwork in order to conquer evil, there's always this little bit of they're all ready to leave each other at some point, which makes the ending make sense, but also doesn't make it make sense. I swear I'm gonna get to that. But even besides that, I still enjoyed the show. But I'm still gonna get ahead of myself, so before I talk about the show, I need to talk about the marketing. It was very interesting how this show ended up being produced. Legendary Defender was picked up by DreamWorks and Netflix, and were ran by Lauren Montgomery and Joaquim Dos Santos. I will be calling them Montgomery and JDS from here on, who also worked on shows such as Legend of Korra and Justice League. But even though it was being produced by 2 veterans in animation, Voltron is actually owned by World Events Productions, also known as WEEP. I'm not gonna say WAP, WEEP, because I am weeping for this. So back in the day, Teen Titans and Young Justice were 2 of the most popular cartoons on Netflix, but were subsequently cancelled. And a lot of the cancellation that came behind it, even though they deny it's because of a huge female audience, was that they were supposed to sell toys. So you watch the show, you buy the toys. And I think Weep was doing the same thing with Voltron, but it's ironic because the toys were not great. In fact, most of the merchandise isn't. I personally own more fan merch than official merchandise, and that's just because even the official merchandise was super hard to find. I could not find in any of my Southern California stores find the action figures or even some of the weapons. And those that I did find online were upmarketed because they were super popular. I did see some people were able to get Shiro, Lance, and Keith, and although they were toys for Hunk, Pidge, and Allura, I heard they ended up not going into production because they weren't popular characters. The only toys that were popular were the metal lion cast, or metal cast lions. Yeah, the lions made out of metal that they can transform into Voltron. But those ones were easier to find. They were sold at majority of Hot Topics. But the figures of the Paladins themselves, I don't know, I couldn't find them. The official Voltron store is its own weird entity. It is owned still by Weep, and although they are selling third-party merchandise, a lot that they make themselves is very questionable quality. They do sell stuff like the posters, Funko Pops, and comics, but again, they didn't make them themselves. There were other distributors behind that, and they're just one of the many distributors. But for example of their original stuff, you want to take a look at this Christmas ornament from 2019. I think it's a cricket cutout with ribbon and a stapler. Compare that to some of the other merchandise they have that is obviously produced by someone else. I think it's safe to say, I don't know if we knew what they want in terms of merchandise, but if your goal is to sell merchandise, wouldn't you want to make it a bit better quality? Also, you should look at this COVIDtron pin. I'm going to come back to that later. And the Funko Pops didn't come out until the last season of Voltron. I thought Funko Pops were one of those toys that are just churned out in mass. Why did it take so long for you to get Funko Pops? When going back to the show, one of the oddest choices they ended up doing were splitting some of the seasons, and I don't think that was the staff's fault. That had to have been Netflix or DreamWorks. Each season was supposed to contain 13 episodes. Seasons 1 and Season 2 had 13 episodes each, so did 7 and 8. However, seasons 3 to 6 did not. And from the way that it was split, I think seasons 3 and 4 were meant to be one season as well as 5 and 6. Because when combining those seasons, you will get the full 13 episodes. Season 3 and 5 also had this issue of it just kind of ends, and not in a way like ending like a cliffhanger. It's like it ended and then they forgot to give you the next episode. But seasons 4 and 6 clearly complete that arc. They said that they split the seasons in order to give us more Voltron, but it just really threw off the pacing, and again, I can't fault the writers on that, but how are we supposed to enjoy a show where we couldn't finish, you know, a character arc or even a story arc? It's because of that I think Voltron was meant to be a full 6 seasons, not 8. I mean, they were still going to have the 78 episodes regardless, but I don't see why they had to split the seasons like that. They said it was to give us more Voltron throughout the year, but 8 seasons in 2 years? I don't see why they couldn't have just dropped, you know, 4 seasons one year and then 4 seasons the next, or something like that. The point is that split of the seasons was an odd choice, and I think definitely affected the way the Voltron show was just running in general. Now, is that to say I wanted Voltron to run 3 to 4 years? Definitely not. 2 years was long enough in the Voltron fandom, which is what I'd like to move to next because, oh my god, the fandom. Just know the fan behavior of Voltron was so bad. If you go on Legendary Defender's Wikipedia page, they have a section talking about the fan base, and those 2 paragraphs are just the tip of the iceberg for what really happened. For me to explain Voltron's infamous fandom behavior, I need to explain the term anti, and if you've been on the internet long enough or you've looked at a cartoon, I think you'll get the general idea of what an anti is, but let me start with the origins. The term anti came from Tumblr, shocker, but it was actually used as a tagging method so that people can use it to block a post. Say that if I'm talking about spiders but you're arachnophobic, I would tag it as anti-spider. That way, if you hate spiders, you can have that as a block list tag. And when I tag it as anti-spider, that's just to help you, my follower, to be able to block that if you don't want to see that post. Then I believe that it started to be used for shipping purposes, specifically when someone doesn't like a ship, say I don't like John Moriarty, I would tag it as anti-John Moriarty to let you guys know this is a negative post talking about a ship that I don't like. And that way, if you do like John Moriarty, you can blacklist the anti-tag so that you don't have to see my post. And somehow that kind of tagging method just shifted from a courtesy to a personality. You hate a fictional ship so much, you make it your goal, your personality, to let everyone know how much you hate it. You hate the ship so much, you think those who ship it are bad people. You hate the ship so much, you are going through fan art and telling all those artists they are horrible people for drawing the art. You're going to writers telling them they're horrible for writing the ship. You're going on gift sets that people make saying, wow, I really hate this. You're purposely exposing yourself to a ship because you hate it. The anti-rhetoric is very backwards. My friends say they noticed the anti-shift on Tumblr around 2014, but it is okay to say that a lot of fandom had this kind of behavior before the term anti was coined. I would recommend Sarah Zed's video on the John Locke conspiracy because that kind of is a small example of anti-behavior. And if you have watched her video, just imagine the three Powerpuff Girls of the John Locke conspiracy, but instead of just three annoying older women who are for some reason invading a personal space, imagine thousands of young teenagers and adults instead, and they are outright doxing you just because of a ship you like. One of the first antis I personally came across was in Miraculous Ladybug. I ended up following this person only because I was fascinated. Why do they hate Miraculous Ladybug so much, but they kept retweeting about it? They hated the creators, they hated the writing of the show, they hated anyone who drew fan art for it, that they were warning their friends, don't follow this artist. They drew Ladybug once. They would comment on gift sets that people would make saying how it was super inappropriate and how they could waste their time making a show like this. Like, what? But you're still reblogging the post, even if you're adding your own commentary to it, you're giving it notes still. But this particular anti ended up being part of a group of people who were trying to dox a Steven Universe artist because they didn't like the way that she drew one of the characters, and it got so bad she did attempt suicide. Now, from what I was able to find of this artist, she is fine now, and actually she was able to find the person who doxed her in the first place and got an arrest warrant. I think the official warrant was for cyberstalking and cyberbullying, and I don't know what came of it officially, if it ever went to court, but the point is she was able to stand up for herself, and I am very happy she was able to do that. But these antis didn't learn. Even when they did that, they blamed her for doxing back, even though she didn't actually dox someone back. She just, reported it as she should have. And they actually stood their ground saying that they were right in order to dox her like this. But that is just one example that would later become kind of a normality in fandom, and specifically in Voltron. Antis have this mob mentality of attacking anything they deemed problematic, and that's a problem in and of itself because the term of problematic is super subjective. As of recently, Antis started really liking Hannibal, a show about a cannibal. They excuse the cannibalism, but they hate that Will and Hannibal are a couple. They call it the most toxic relationship, and they hate the creator Brian Fuller for making this kind of relationship. Just so you know, Brian Fuller has the best clapbacks to them, but that's what fascinates me. So you can excuse cannibalism, but you can't excuse a male-gay relationship? So fast forward to 2016, and yay, Voltron's the #1 show on Tumblr. Did I mention the artist who got doxxed was on Tumblr? Do you see where I'm going with this? Hey guys, Editing Hazel here. So I just wanted to put on this part of the video that I'm not going to touch upon every single drama that happened in Voltron, because if I did, I think this video was going to be 3 days long rather than the however long it's going to be. And there's a lot that I'm going to mention that I can't find the sources of. Either they've just been deleted, or I don't know, Tumblr purge has really ruined a lot of this. So I'm going to link down below to a Tumblr blog called Hunty Pastel Lance. I know it sounds kind of weird, I swear they're not an anti, but they have actually archived every single drama that has happened in Voltron, and they're honestly a really nice archive source to see like what was going on. I'm going to be using screenshots from what they still have saved, so even though it's not like exactly from the original source, I think it's still going to be the best bet to show like what the heck the fandom was like back in, 2016 to 2018. Fans already began to argue if the ship with Shiro, known as Shaladin, I hate that word, was considered pedophilic because he was older than them, and it didn't help that someone did record a video of the creators saying their ages. Now, I'm going to be perfectly clear and transparent. The person who made that video initially, they were doing it just for their own followers. It wasn't meant to be used this way, and they do actually regret making that video. But antis took it like it was their Bible. On Tumblr, antis made lists or shit lists of artists who drew Shiro and any of the paladins, specifically Sheath, although ships like Shiro and Lance were also pretty popular, and they would call them pedophilic artists, even though there was no evidence of the actual crime. It's just they drew Shiro with one of the paladins. There were long lists of that. And eventually it turned into kind of a joke where someone would say, add me on the list. Just add me just because you're already adding all these people. And then Antis took it a step further, that even if you like, say, a pairing like Keith and Lance, if you liked that pairing wrong, you would also be added to the list because you're problematic. Again, it comes back to the problematic being way too broad of a term, and honestly, it's all fiction. But they continued on. There were a lot of people who end up getting doxxed, artists, writers, even people on the staff. Montgomery, JDS, Josh Keaton, the voice of Shiro, and Bex, the voice of Paige, got kind of the worst of it. It actually got so bad to a point that both Bex and Keaton had to make their own Tumblr and Twitter posts saying that their family and their own personal space has been endangered. Antis had been sending Bex death and rape threats, and Anti started accusing Keaton of abusing his kids. They brought his kids and his wife into this just because they didn't even ship Shiro and the Paladins, by the way. They just didn't hate the ship. They were supportive of shippers. They were following or retweeting art from shippers. Antis hated it that much they considered just as bad, even though they weren't shippers themselves. But regardless of what you ship, the fact that you think it's justifiable to send a death and rape threat, what? And on a side note, we can agree, right, that accusing someone of pedophilia is actually a very serious crime. So the fact that you're accusing an artist of drawing Shiro and Keith as the equivalent of someone abusing a kid is just really out of whack. Not only are you now watering down what that term means, you're also making it harder for people to actually find out who an abuser is. Nowadays, when someone says, oh, don't follow this artist, they're a pedophile, I'm like, did they actually hurt a minor, or did they draw Bakugo? It's also very insulting to a lot of CSA survivors that you're saying that their trauma and survival is the equivalent of a drawing, because many of them have already said that it's not. And actually many CSA survivors who have come out against Antis telling them to stop using those terms are then later on told that they deserved it. So Antis aren't protecting anyone, they're actually still targeting survivors. And you're allowed to hate things in media, you're allowed to hate problematic things, but it's also partly your job to start blocking it. Oh, you hate that this artist draws this pairing? Block them. It's easy as that. And yet for some reason you stalk their page and then send them stuff and interact with them on purpose, and they're not doing anything. It also takes away the message of organizations that are trying to help CSA survivors. There was one organization that had said that a lot of the resources were wasted because people were only sending like fan art of anime characters, and they said they had to filter all that out to find actual evidence of CSA, and there was nothing. So you're wasting someone's time and resources to protect kids, but you're not protecting anyone, you're just mad that someone drew something that you didn't like. So that's why if you are an anti, maybe reconsider. You don't have to like a ship, you don't have to like something, but calling yourself an anti in order to justify your hatred of a fictional thing is helping nobody, and it's actually very disrespectful to CSA survivors. Just a side note. If you were there and attended the 2018 San Diego Comic-Con panel, there was a Lance stan, if you will, who was also an anti, who used her question to proudly scream at the creators how much she hated them because they didn't write Lance correctly or something, and half the crowd cheered. They cut off Q&A after her, by the way. There was supposed to be more Q&A, and they stopped it. They actually took the mic away from her, and she still kept screaming. According to one of my friends, she's been like that since Attack on Titan days, and I was assuming this girl had to have at least been a young adult, so if she was acting like this in Attack on Titan back in 2013, and this is her now, do you see why I don't trust teenage antis? If they're just gonna grow up like this into anti-adults, I don't know what to do about that. If you want a full list of anti-behavior that's not just in Voltron, by the way, but actually in many other fandom circles, I've linked down below. I think her name was Liz Discourse Rant, who actually has been keeping a Google Doc talking about all the various things antis have done, and a lot of it does include, so far, 3 attempts of suicide of artists. So if you're still watching this and thinking like, I'm an anti, but I'm not like that, again, maybe reconsider the term you're using, because antis are dangerous. Anti behavior, and specifically Clancy behavior, so Clans fans who are antis, is the reason why I cannot stand Clans anymore. I genuinely loathe it now, which sucks because Clans was my first ship when I came into Voltron. I hadn't written in so long, and my first fanfic after a long time was Clans. I loved it, but now I can't look at a piece of Clans work without thinking, is someone gonna pop up and tell me, you're a horrible person, I hate you? And this is also something in Voltron, although not just in Clancy circles. Did you guys notice it was a taboo to multi-ship? Like, what happened? Why aren't I allowed to ship Clance and Sheath? There were both sides of the circle who hated that, so actually the OT3, Shaclance, which is a super ugly name, we gotta work on that, is actually, a lot of people didn't like Shaclancers because they hated the fact that you couldn't choose between Sheath or Clance. It should be known not everyone in Voltron was an anti, of course. If that was the case, I don't think I would have been able to talk to the friends I am able to now who I met through Voltron, but the loudest voices sound like the majority. And even if you did everything you could to block them online and just keep your close circle of friends, if you went to conventions, they were running around there too. I would like to give a shout out to the brown-facing Lance cosplayer who called my friend a pedophile for cosplaying Shiro. You're brown-facing. You have no say in anything until you wipe the poop off your face. I think the best way to avoid anti-drama, or just fandom drama in general, was to keep Voltron within the space between you and your 5 friends. But it was still hard to avoid that unless you just didn't go on social media at all. No matter what circle, you were gonna just find something amiss, whether it was anti-drama or just fandom drama in general. Didn't the binge culture of Voltron actually make it super hard to watch? Each season of Voltron dropped around midnight, and just for me personally, that was hard to watch. I could not watch at the midnight time, and a lot of people as well either had work the next day or were just unable to do that. But you would wake up the next day and every single spoiler possible was already up. One time I removed all social media from my phone just so I wouldn't be tempted to look, and I still got spoiled because I got a text message with spoilers. Don't spoil your friends. Ask them first if they watched it, because not everyone stayed up until midnight to watch it. Fanzines or fan anthologies, whatever you call them, please don't yell at me, were also very popular in Voltron, but I think we're also very oversaturated, because many fanzines existed. However, a lot of them also didn't see to full completion. A lot ended up either dropping midst the contribution period, or they stopped during the pre-order period. There were some zines that went as far as pre-orders, and someone stole the money. One zine called the This and Every Universe zine was a collection of Clance, Sheath, Shance, and Heath. Was an anthology of these 4 popular Voltron ships, and it went nowhere. As far as we can tell with production, they actually produced, from what I can tell, the prints, the enamel pins, but not the physical book itself. And in the end, one of the moderators ran away with supposedly 10K. The other moderators who did not have access to the PayPal or the funds could not do anything, so no one got a refund, and as far as I know, to this day, no one actually got their zine. So that's just one of the many scams. Supposedly that zine moderator also worked on My Hero ones too, so be careful for those who are in My Hero zines. There was also an infamous zine moderator in Overwatch who took the funds in order to fund a Lance Eda bag. Do you see why Voltron fans get the butt end of things? Do you see why no one likes Voltron fans? Even in a non-Voltron zine, Voltron comes back. Once again, the fandom is just best served with your 5 closest friends talking about the show and just hanging out with each other. Still, that all changed when Season 8 hit. Oh god. Season 8 is why we drink. This is gonna sound weird. It was too long. It was too long of a season, and it's only 13 episodes. It didn't feel like that, it felt like 20. And I think in regards to the episodes in that season, only a few are important, and these are really just my opinions on which ones were the important ones. Episode 1 establishes the Lance and Allura relationship, even though Allura was super depressed. Episode 2 actually gives more insight to Lotor's backstory, which proved Lotor was not the bad guy the entire time. Day 47 is fine because I just like the MFEs. A lot of people didn't, but I did. And Clear Day was just a fun episode. We get to see the Paladins at a carnival, except for Allura because she's depressed. And then everything implodes. It took forever to get to this point, but everything literally implodes. Hagar, who is the new villain of the season, was able to find a center of the universe or something, and then she started ripping it apart, basically, until all of existence is gone. Then, of course, she is stopped by Voltron, and they have to repair it. But, oh no, they need a strong magical entity to repair the universe. And at this point, you think it's the obvious. Oh, Voltron's just big energy. Why don't we sacrifice Voltron to save the universe? And Allura was like, no, I will die. And I'm like, what? What? And everyone's like, okay, Allura, bye. Really, Lance? Her boyfriend, who saved her in season 6, decided, okay, honey, you can go become the universe now. Like, she had to one-up Princess Yue or something. Ugh, my girlfriend became the moon. My girlfriend became the universe. I think Allura pulled a Madoka, which is awkward because when that happened, Homura was like, I'm gonna go save her and force her to become a physical being. Which means Lance didn't love her enough the way Homura loved Madoka. I think the lesbians do it better. And then the Paladins go back to Earth and then eventually separate. Hunk becomes a new diplomatic chef, I think is what his job is. Pidge and her family are now running based on Altean technology and are looking for the new legendary defenders. Keith joins the Blade of Mamora and becomes a humanitarian AIDS crisis leader. Shiro retired at 27 and got married. And Lance became a hermit, living possibly on Earth, possibly on Altea as a farmer. Not sure where. Also, he has Allura's markings now. So for all those Lance stands who are like, oh my god, Altean Lance. Ta-da! And once a year, they meet at Allura's statue for dinner and take selfies with the statue. Their friend's dead. And then one day, for some reason, the lions leave and are going to a cluster of stars that is clearly Allura. So, again, Allura became the galaxy and the lions are going back to her, I don't know. So season 8 was weird, and overall it just didn't feel earned, if that makes sense. Because it still doesn't make sense to me, but that's how it felt. It didn't feel like we earned any of that. Because we spent 8 seasons trying to defeat the bad guy, and in a way, I don't think they did, because it required one of them to die. And again, why did she die? Part of this problem were that there were too many villains, and the pacing of the villains was super odd. I'm gonna go back to Legend of Korra on this since Montgomery and JDS did work on Korra. But Korra had a different reason to why there was always a villain per season. So Legend of Korra was not supposed to get more than 1 season. They were only greenlit for 1 and then slowly started being lit for other seasons. That being said, they couldn't exactly have a villain doing an overarching of 4 seasons because they didn't know how many seasons they were going to get. So in the story, there's about 1 villain per season. But it works because each season has a beginning and its own ending. So the villain has a beginning and ending. Voltron, not so much. Zarkon was the main villain for seasons 1 through 5. Lotor was the villain for the ending of 6. 7 didn't actually have a main villain, but there was still something they were fighting against. And then season 8, it's Hagar, Lotor's mom. And I think the pacing of that is also what made it kind of weird. So Lotor's entire family was bad, but clearly they're not. Or at least not Lotor is. I get that the finale just wanted to wrap things up, that they saved the universe, but again, it didn't feel like a wrap-up at all. I almost wish it did end in season 7, and even though season 7 was a cliffhanger, it felt more complete than season 8. The only way for me to talk about all of this is talking about 2 main components, or 2.5. I'm actually going to mention Lotor in this from the request of my friends, and they actually made really good points to why I still don't consider Lotor a villain. Which, again, makes it kind of weird because he is. Like I said at the beginning, this was a biased review. I actually wasn't going to mention Lotor because I kind of just didn't care for him the way I cared about Shiro and Allura. But after talking to a few of my friends who love Lotor, I do want to actually bring him up for this. What was Lotor supposed to be? There was an interview with JDS and Montgomery who described Lotor's rise and downfall as a Zuko turning into an Azula, and that's just really odd. And as an avid Avatar fan, I have a problem with that comparison. So first is the implication that Lotor can never have a happy ending. And that's just pretty much screwed up. I'd like to thank my friend Sarah for pointing this out, because Hagar's whole character arc, villain story, was that she's trying to find a universe where she and her family can be happy. A universe where she can be a good mom, there are no villains, there's no war, she is taking care of her son. She finds a universe where she died, but Lotor and Zarkon are fine, so she can join that universe. But Lotor is still too young. She goes there and Lotor freaks out because he's a child, of course, and he's like, Mommy died, what's this new mommy doing here? And she also looks really creepy. So she gets so mad that this new Lotor can't accept her as his mother, that she decides to destroy it and destroy the rest of the universe. And that was implying that no matter what, they can't be happy. And that's a huge low blow, especially for Lotor, who is a child of abuse. So again, Lotor's arc was totally weird and he definitely wasn't the bad guy. He was introduced kind of as a is he not, and comparing him to Zuko is really odd considering how Zuko's ending is versus Lotor's. The parallels between Zuko and Lotor are very obvious, so it makes it worse that Lotor got the bad ending and Zuko clearly didn't. There's an episode where Lotor, as it turned out, was taking care of a planet. He did technically conquer it, but he conquered it by, cohabitation. He introduced this planet to their technology, and he was co-leading it. Zarkon, his dad, didn't like that at all. He wanted Lotor to enslave the people. Lotor refused, and then was forced to watch as his father blew up that planet. All of his friends died on that, and Lotor is seen begging for his father's forgiveness and begging for the survival of those people who did nothing wrong. And that is exactly the same parallel to Zuko. The reason why Zuko was banished was because he spoke out of turn at a war meeting. Zuko didn't believe that the Fire Nation should be using new, untrained soldiers to fight against the Earth Nation, especially that they didn't know that's what they were doing, and he felt that it was unfair to let these people unnecessarily die. Then his dad got mad that he spoke out of turn and burned his face. So, could you imagine if Avatar ended that instead of Zuko joining Team Avatar and he, defeats his sister and becomes a new Fire Lord, that Zuko just melts? Like, what if Zuko just melted and that's his ending? So it's weird to me that they also said that it's Zuko becoming an Azula, because one, Zuko doesn't become Azula, and second, Azula is a completely different entity. And that's the weird thing, because even though Azula and Zuko both grew up in the same manipulative, abusive environment, Azula decided to choose to become like her father. She wanted to stay by his side. Lotor clearly did not. Lotor killed his own dad. He didn't want to be like his dad, even if it meant killing him. Obviously, Zuko didn't kill his father, but yeah, Zuko and Lotor are still different, but also just same enough that Lotor becoming Zarkon makes zero sense in any context. Lotor's character arc or message ended up being, if you were born into a bad family, you die in a bad family. And that's a really shitty and dark take for a kid's show. Shiro himself was kind of an odd entity in the show because he was supposed to die in season 2. The only reason why they couldn't kill him off was because he ended up being a super popular character, and either DreamWorks or Weep decided that if you killed off Shiro, they wouldn't be able to sell toys, which is ironic because the toys weren't great. Personally, if Shiro did stay dead, I probably would have stopped watching this show. He was my favorite character, but they did bring him back as a clone, and if you know me, I like my clones. But that begs the intent of Shiro and what they were doing with him. Season 7, Episode 1 is the origin of Shiro and Keith's backstory, which the creator said was actually supposed to be in Season 2, Episode 1, it just didn't make the cut in terms of pacing. This episode does reveal that Shiro was very sick and dying, but also that he had a fiancé, and that Shiro's gay. But that means if this was supposed to be shown in Season 2, and Shiro was revealed to be gay, were they going to kill the gay character in Season 2? Or, since he survived, they add the story of Adam later on. But before all that, before we figure out his sexuality, a thing happened with Voltron. So, Shiro died, Keith becomes the leader, Allura becomes one of the paladins, but then, surprise, Shiro's back, and then Keith is written off the show. So Keith decides to go with the purple people, and Shiro becomes the leader of Voltron again. But Keith is written off for like an entire season as a paladin. And that, again, makes the connection between all the Paladins very odd. They ended up ostracizing Keith, and then these new Paladins have to work with this other Shiro, which they don't realize is a clone, but there's obviously something off about him. But then Keith does return. The clone is ended up being a sleeper agent for Hagar. Shiro and Keith end up fighting, and then Shiro returns. And that once again begs the question, how is Voltron going to work? There were only 5 lions, but now 6 people. Keith ends up resuming control of the Black Lion as the leader, and Shiro takes a step back. And by step back, I mean I don't know what he's still doing there. The only significant thing I think Shiro does in Season 7 is grief for his dead fiancé, and that's about it. His entire Season 7 arc is grief for my dead ex-fiancé, and then become the leader of a new thick robot. Shiro's relationship with Keith is also cut off, and I know people are gonna say, oh, you're just saying that because you're a Sheath shipper. Yes, I am. But not just Keith, it's also with Lance and Hunk. In fact, Shiro's relationship with any of the male paladins is gone after the reveal that he's actually gay. Season 7 and 8, Shiro's interactions with any male character is mostly just Sam Holt and Iverson, who are both voiced by Nolan North, so hell yeah to that. And isn't that kind of weird that despite being with these paladins, he just cuts them all off? It makes me think that the paladins of Voltron were really meant to be Keith, Lance, Hunk, Allura, and Pidge. And Shiro wasn't supposed to come back, but now that he had to, there wasn't much they could do with him. There's a part in Season 8 where Keith is being held hostage by Zethrid with a knife to his throat, and all Shiro does is stand there. Even the MFEs, like, they are actually doing something, but Shiro's like, oh no, he's being held. And I don't think Shiro was supposed to be in that scene. It gets to the part when Allura ends up dying, and Shiro is there to say goodbye to her. It got to a point I thought, I don't think Shiro's earned this. I don't think he earned that goodbye. I think Koran should have been in Shiro's place. That's how much he didn't feel as important to the show anymore. And again, it was only after the reveal that he was gay in Season 7. And the husband. Oh my god, the husband. Look, I wasn't a fan of Adam. I didn't like the ship Adachi. Adam's scene with Shiro was clearly a breakup. And I get Adam just cared for Shiro's safety, but it felt very ableist to tell your sick partner, you're not allowed to work. Like, Shiro was cleared for duty. There was no reason why he couldn't go up. Adam just didn't want him to, and that eventually made the rift in their relationship. But even Adam's one scene had way more character than what Curtis was given. We see Curtis in 2 scenes. One as a communications officer that I think Sam Holt is talking to, and later on in the gym where he talks about liking dogs or something. I watched that season once. We didn't even know his name unless you had subtitles turned on. The closed captioning would tell you who's talking, and his name says Curtis, but no one ever says Curtis in the show. I think Shiro's marriage at the end of Season 8 was to prove that he was gay, which is weird because I want to say the majority of fans had accepted that he was, or at least he wasn't straight. This marriage was a, aha, see, we do have a male gay character and that this is representation. But it really wasn't. Majority of people did not like this relationship whatsoever, or this ending, because it came out of left field. And I don't want to hate on those who did like his marriage. There are a lot of people who were happy that they got to see a gay male relationship in a kid's cartoon, and if you want to have that, that is yours. I just personally think it was a cop-out of, hey, we did it, we got the rep. Allura deserved so much better, and honestly, screw the show for making her another black female death in a sci-fi and fantasy. Like, there are already so many black female deaths in sci-fi and fantasy, and Allura being another one, hers didn't even make any sense. She decided, I don't really feel like being on the show anymore, so I'm gonna die. And honestly, girl, same, but it's still racist nonetheless. So I know I talked about Allura's death already, but I'm not done yet. I have a lot to say. My friend Zent's Girl on Tumblr has a list of black female deaths in sci-fi and fantasy, and Allura was recently added to that list. And the fact that there's a list at all shows that this kind of death is a trope, and a trope that honestly needs to stop. And I ask, what was Allura's death even for? Usually when a woman is fridged, it's to be plot progression for a male character or plot progression in general. But her death was at the very end of the series, so there is nothing to progress and nothing to motivate anyone. It was just the ending. When Voltron hit Netflix, they also had a special series for the original Defenders of the Universe, the 80s Voltron, in which the staff got to pick their favorite episodes. Lord Montgomery picked one of the episodes where that version of Allura died. I think she got poisoned and the Paladins thought she died, and she said as a kid it was super traumatizing to see her favorite and only female character die. So the fact that she wrote the ending of Allura dying, I can't help but ask, did you want to traumatize us too? Like, why did Allura die? So remember when I said earlier that Voltron had this problem that the team was never really a team because they all wanted to go back to their families? That actually plays a huge part into Allura. So again, Allura and Coran are one of the last of their species. Everyone else, once they get back to Earth, get to go back with their families. And Allura essentially doesn't have her family. However, in Season 8, Episode 1, she's invited to Lance's place. She is introduced as Lance's girlfriend. He's there with his mom, dad, and all his siblings, and they all love Allura. They essentially accept Allura into the family. And although this isn't a replacement for her family, you think, oh, she does have a family, a newfound family. She completely rejects it. The entire time she's written as very depressed, doesn't want to be there, even though she confesses her love with Lance. It's not a happy moment at all, and that's just really odd. They said it's because everyone else had their family except Allura. She felt out of place, and that was part of the drive to wanting to leave. But again, she has a family, a found family, if not the Paladins, Lance's family, and it just feels weird that she can have all this love and support, and then the writer said, but it's not enough. It's not enough to have this. She has to die to be with her family. Allura does have an arc of her grieving for her family, grieving for her dad and her mom. And I'm not saying that she had to get over it, but it's an arc that showed that she is moving on. So she moved on, and then she didn't. She just moved right back into not wanting to be with anyone else, that she would rather be dead with her family. And that's, again, what? Why did she overcome it and then only go back to it? So entire Season 8, she stays super depressed, and I don't exactly remember what happened, but I guess there's this dark entity that's making her see Lotor, her ex-boyfriend of 2 hours, maybe, and she's tempted into the dark side. And honestly, if you told me that Allura and Minerva were fighting on lava rocks with space swords, I'd believe it at this point. I wish she became Anakin Skywalker. She didn't. How much would you kill, actually, for that? For Lance to have those buns and being like, Allura, you're breaking my heart. Why does he have that accent? And before anyone says it, yeah, I guess sacrificing Voltron would have been too obvious to rethread the universe. But also, isn't that the point? Because how is Allura dying not obvious? In fact, again, it's so not obvious, it makes no sense to anyone. If Allura dying with her family and the bad guys was a subversion of expectations, oh yeah, I was subverted alright. I did not like that. It'd actually be the equivalent if any of the other Paladins died. Like, what if Keith decided, okay, I'll die instead, and everyone said, yeah, sure. But again, the racist implications that came from Allura is what makes this harder. She is another black female character dying in sci-fi fantasy. Not just her, actually. Minerva was also a black character. So Allura and Minerva are dying, Minerva being Hagar, and Lotor, who is mixed race. So 3 people of color are dying? For what? In sci-fi, again, why? Side note to correct the last thing I just said, I actually meant to say black characters, that it's very weird that Voltron ends with 3 distinct black characters dying, and it's because, yes, Voltron Legendary Defender technically had a people of color cast, but in the end the ones who ended up dying were Allura, the black female character, Minerva, the black female villain, and Lotor, the one who was of mixed race. Also, in a previous interview, apparently Hunk was supposed to die too, who is also one of the dark-skinned characters, and so it's just really odd to me that Voltron, you know, despite the diversity, they kill off the black characters. Like, excuse me? Also, my chair is squeaking, I am so sorry. I think the lesson to take away from Shiro and Allura and even Lotor is, even with your best intentions of trying to diversify your characters and cast, you actually need diverse writers and sensitivity readers, because even though Shiro's gay, even though Allura's black, they were done the worst of all the characters, and it's really insulting. I almost want to say, well, don't give us a gay character, don't give us a black character if you were just going to treat them like garbage. So season 8 ends horribly, and I'm going to summarize some of the small details that happened after before going into specific details, but similarly to the current ending of Supernatural and Destiel fans, the John Locke conspiracy, and Snyder Cut bros, people were wondering if there is a real season 8 of Voltron. But before season 8 came out, there were still leaks of the very end, and one of those leaks showed Shiro marrying a different guy, so not Curtis, and that prompted people to think, did they redo the ending? And to put on my conspiracy hat on, Josh Keaton, the voice actor of Shiro, was back at DreamWorks to do some voice recording, and as far as I can tell, I couldn't see him accredited for any other DreamWorks show except for Voltron, so that's what made the rest of us conspire, did he go back to re-record Voltron lines? And if he did, I wonder who he did it for. I know he doesn't just voice Shiro, but Shiro had nothing to do in season 8, so the question is, what was he doing there? Was he re-recording? Where's the original script? And so everyone's wondering, was this the real season 8? I hate that I fell for this. I hate I was part of this group that thought that's not the real season 8. The real one is somewhere else. They wrote something completely different. And it took almost another year for me to finally accept there is nothing else. The ending of Voltron is just that. It's what we are given is the end. If anything, maybe there's a first draft, but what show doesn't have a first draft of something? I did see circulate a few months ago this other group is trying to uncover the real season 8. I don't know where they are now. I think I've blocked them because I just didn't want to see it. But just know that there are people still out there trying to get the real season 8. And who knows, maybe Zack Snyder will release the Voltron cut. But let me talk about some notable things that actually happened due to the ending of season 8. Something too that I noticed that the drop of Voltron fans was drastic when it came to the ending. Like, if you go to cons now, remember when cons happened? Before, when we still used to go to cons, you would see cosplayers from even old series. Avatar still has a huge fan base. Avatar is the only thing I can think of that has an ending with a huge fan base. I obviously don't watch a lot of stuff. But Voltron, I just noticed when it came to artists, writers, cosplayers, everyone just dropped what they did in Voltron and quickly moved on to something else. For those who stayed, here's what happened. So VoltCon is a fan convention that isn't just for Voltron, but also encompassing a lot of other mecha stuff, so Voltron, Transformers, Robotech. I think Power Rangers are also part of this. They were started by a group called the Shakeups up in Indiana, and they wanted to hold their own convention, and they called it VoltCon. At first, a lot of people were calling this the next DashCon, but safe to say that the first VoltCon back in 2019 was actually a success. My partner went, and they said it was honestly a great time, there were no issues, and they sold at Artist Alley, and it was fun. The problem, though, came in 2020, because as you all know, we're still in a pandemic. And before I continue with VoltCon, let me go back to talk about WIP. I swear it's all related, it's all COVID-19 related. Yeah, that sounds weird, I know. So as I said before, WIP owns the Voltron store, and besides some of the merchandise that have been created by other parties, they also do have original stuff. Most of their stuff on the store before had to do with the 1984 Voltron, so the classic Voltron. And stuff that isn't Funko Pops or convention posters, they also have commissioned kind of as original-ish work, I guess, for their store. One of them was the infamous Christmas ornament of 2019, which looks like a cricket cutout with a staple in it, and selling for $6 a pop. So, but what came about as of recently was COVIDtron, a collection coin that says COVIDtron. I'll let you take a look and decide on this design as is, but what? Why would you combine Voltron and COVID-19? You know, the virus that has killed over 200,000 Americans and counting. That number is still going up, by the way, and that's just in America alone. Supposedly, this coin was made and commissioned, and if you buy from it, it was going to be donated to UNICEF and other first responders. And according to these tweets here from a guy who knew either he knew the designer or he was in a Facebook group where the design was being processed. He says he has not seen any proof that the proceeds have gone to UNICEF. And as of right now, we still don't have that proof. And if not just for the COVIDtron, they also have these other coins, and again, they're for first responders, but all the coins specifically say for the police department. And you know how it's been with the climate of police just in 2020 alone. Why did the Voltron store approve of that? And again, conspiracy theories, putting back the tinfoil hat, also alleged, because I don't want to get sued, supposedly the people who own WEP and the Voltron store have a more right-wing conservative mindset, so I can maybe see why they would commission a coin that's like, support the police, to be police positive. Yeah, that's just not that's not boding over well. And also, who are these coins for? I know there are older Voltron fans. There are Voltron fans in their 20s all the way to their 60s, depending on when they were watching this. But who's actually buying these coins? I actually want to know who bought them. And if they did, are they good? Why? Did the money actually go to someone important? Or was it just for profit? So Titus, back into VoltCon. As we know, COVID-19 hit, the world essentially had to stop, or at least the world stopped. I don't know what America's doing. But for the most part, most comic conventions are canceled. Except for some few that didn't, and they have gotten some backlash because obviously we should not be doing conventions in a pandemic. One of the conventions that didn't end up canceling was VoltCon. They kept announcing and advertising that they were just going to keep going through it, and I did tweet at them asking if it's going to be safe. They said they're going to follow safety protocols with masks and social distancing, but with an indoor event like that, it's honestly just not safe. And yet, they continued it. And one of the sponsors of VoltCon is the Voltron store and WEP. So for them to not only make this coin for first responders, but then advertise a dangerous convention during a dangerous time, it's so disingenuous. So you're advertising for this convention and also want people to buy your COVID coin? Really? Pictures from the convention show that everyone was wearing masks, but in all honesty, if you ended up going, I hope you did a 14-day quarantine at least, and taken a test and let people know you went to do this thing. I honestly doubt it. I hear, like, the mask climate in Indiana isn't really that strict in compared to other states. So if you went to VoltCon, I hope you're okay, but I also hope you didn't infect anyone else, because if you're advertising this for first responders and giving money to first responders, why are you giving them more bodies instead? This one's going to be brief, but SheathCon is also another convention that's post-Voltron, and I was actually part of this committee for a bit before eventually dropping out. So SheathCon was supposed to be a small meetup during Anime Expo of 2020 for Sheath fans, and it was just to spread some Sheath positivity, since Sheath shippers were one of the groups of Voltron who got hit the hardest with anti-rhetoric. Of course, when antis got wind that there's a SheathCon, they were comparing it to the next DashCon. They were harassing everyone who was on the team, including myself. But in the end, COVID hit, so SheathCon had to be postponed, which VoltCon should have done, and they didn't. And I know there's also another issue with conventions to why they continue. I think just due to venue, they can't get a refund. But at some point, you just have to take the loss, because even if you keep the convention open, attendance is not going to be as high as you think. I don't know how much money you're trying to make back. It's just not worth the lives. But if you think it's worth the lives, then, screw you. Antis, of course, still exist. Instead of Voltron, they're now just literally everywhere else. It's almost amazing to see an anti in any sort of fandom. The fact that they came into Hannibal, again, a show for adults about a cannibal who happens to have, be in love with a man, they're antis in that. If you're still identifying as an anti, I think you should just go check yourself and really reflect on why you're doing this. If you're that person, and I've had gone comments on this before of, oh, I'm not that kind of anti, I just don't like that ship. That's fine. It's called having a no TP. That's an old fandom term. It's a ship that you don't like. But back in the day, there was also this thing called don't like, don't read. If you don't like something, don't go looking at it. the block and mute function exists for a reason. I use it liberally. So if you don't like something, don't call yourself an anti. Just do everything you can to block and get it out of your social media page. Simple as that. Even when Voltron ended disastrously, I want to say there were still a good amount of Voltron fans that were still active. As someone who was active in the Sheath community, a lot of Sheath people, were still producing Sheath work. And even before COVID hit, I was hosting a Shiro birthday party gathering and my friends showed up. But as I said before, fandom is really more between you and your friends and not a bunch of strangers. However, I do see on both anti and non-anti side of things, it's been kind of hard to separate Voltron out of other media. And this is something I'm guilty of too, but for example, when She-Ra and Cachadora was popular, I saw a lot of people comparing or saying that Cachadora was the Clance that Voltron never had, but a lot of my Cachadora friends actually didn't like Clance, and they said Cachadora is Cachadora and Clance is Clance. When Young Justice came out and one of the main characters, Aqualad, was shown having a boyfriend who has speaking lines, who has a name, and, doesn't die or isn't just shoved in last minute, I compared it saying, wow, I wish Voltron had that. And I realized we need to let these mediums be their own separate entities. Like, yes, even though She-Ra was also produced by DreamWorks, they had a different writing staff, a different team, and She-Ra should just be She-Ra. Voltron should be Voltron, Young Justice should be Young Justice. Yes, there are going to be those comparisons, especially when it comes to LGBT themes. But there is no use anymore saying, wow, I wish Voltron did this, because Voltron ended. It doesn't matter anymore. Actually, to everyone that keeps calling Zuko and Sokka the clans of Avatar, Sokka baby, I am so sorry for that. It's actually been really tough for me to get out of Voltron. It only happened for me this year, and I'm finally going into different mediums that I don't have to think, oh, this reminds me of Voltron. I can have this medium as it is, and I found happiness more in that than I have in Voltron. So, what have we learned from Voltron? Well, first, in a writer's room, you definitely need writers of color and sensitivity readers. Second, there's a good separation between creators, fan creators, and the audience. And yeah, social media has brought us closer together, but I think it's due to the accessibility is why it was so easy to affect someone else with these kind of threats. Even if you hated the ending of Voltron, and I still do, there's no reason to continue sending these kind of hate and death messages to the creators. Just keep yourself separate from them. And again, 3, fandom is just the friends you make along the way, and keep those friends close. Although Voltron leaves a lot of kind of bitterness, I don't want to fault it entirely because I've met a lot of great people through Voltron, and friends who I still talk to this day. Friends that we were able to surpass just liking Voltron, that we like the show, and we also like each other. And if it wasn't for Voltron, I don't think I would have talked to them in the first place. And turns out we have a lot in common outside of Voltron. I think that's great. Those are the friends that you should be keeping. Voltron was the reason I got back into writing. One of my fandoms before college was the MCU, but then during college it was just hard for me to kind of get back into writing. Voltron hit when I graduated and I was back in it. One of my fic that I'm still proud of is a Clance fic, and I wouldn't have written that if not for seeing Voltron. I also got into cosplay because of Voltron. At the time I did like sewing, but I didn't really start taking it seriously until I wanted to cosplay like everyone else. I've also found a lot of great artists, a lot of great writers through Voltron, some that I still follow to today, even if they left Voltron earlier than I did. It's just, their work's amazing, I want to continue following them. But Voltron also made me realize to not put all my energy and effort into just one thing. I think Voltron, for me and many others, at least to those who stuck around for so long, Voltron was an investment, both money-wise and emotionally. There were many people who took days off just to watch the season drop. We would go to conventions and wait in line for hours for autographs and to see the panel. This right here, for the cast, I waited in line for about 6 hours for that. That was time and emotional investment. And I hate to say, I almost regret that. I once stood in line for 3 hours for a Rick and Morty panel. I didn't even get in. And I don't regret that at all. That was a fun experience, just standing there to get disappointed. But this was something I'm passionate about, and it just felt odd putting all this passion into something that by the end, it just was not great. I think I felt obligated to stay interested because of how much time and money I had put into this show. And like I said, that just means you don't have to do it all for one thing. Spread your interests thin. Don't dedicate yourself to something, because in a way it's almost setting up for disappointment if it doesn't go the way you want it to. But that's all. It's been 2 years since the finale, and Voltron still unfortunately haunts me. I've been getting into other things. I'm now completely into the Uncharted series, and House MD is back on Amazon Prime, so I'm going back to that since I used to watch that as a kid. But once in a while, Voltron just kind of comes back to bite, and I think about it like, wow, I really dedicated a lot of time for that? So this is it. Just wanted to kind of reflect of 2 years of something Netflix had given us. It is both a blessing and a curse, and unfortunately mostly a curse. If you made it this far, let me know what your thoughts, or how was your Voltron fandom experience. I know not everyone probably had this, but even if you weren't in Voltron, you knew of the fans. So leave a comment down below, let me know how your experience was. And I will see you guys next time.